Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda Carney. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast. And this week is a bit of an unusual angle on the topic of gender equality, in that I'm talking to Ian Dinwiddy of Inspiring Dads. And we're going to discuss today why supporting new dads at work is actually a route to gender equality, which some may think is not, a little bit out there. We might not necessarily have thought that was the way forward. So Ian, thank you for joining the HR Uprising podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself a bit and actually tell us a little bit more about that premise and where it came from?
Yeah, of course, Lucinda. Thank you very much for inviting me on. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name's Ian Dinwiddy. I'm the founder of a business called Inspiring Dads, and we help stressed dads to balance work and fatherhood. And ultimately, on an individual basis for dads, it's looking to help them to understand how to be a great dad without sacrificing a great career. But actually, a lot of that starts with businesses and how we interact with dads at work, especially around new dads. And that parental transition is really, really tricky for all parents, I think, in many ways. But for dads, we maybe don't spend as much time thinking about possibly what they need, and also ultimately how that's a route to bigger and broader things that we can do, more exciting things we can do with gender equality. From my personal perspective, then I'm a father of two. My daughter was born in 2010, and I've also got a 9-year-old son as well. And when Freya was born in 2010, then I was working as a management consultant, and then I went 4 days a week. And during the first 6 months of Freya's life, and then Lisa, she had fully paid maternity leave, and then I had 2 weeks of statutory, and then she stopped work altogether, and we had about a month of I stopped work altogether. She definitely did not stop work altogether. She went back to work. I stopped altogether, and I became a full-time stay-at-home dad. And I struggled with some of the pressures on a kind of slightly different kind of level that I currently work with individual men. But I struggle with pressures around identity and looking after children and being in a world that perhaps I wasn't that well equipped to deal with. So yeah, originally Inspiring Dads started from my own experience, although at the time I don't think I really knew it, Lucinda.
So it's interesting, actually, because I think my husband actually ended up being a stay-at-home father when we had our second child. So I guess it's something there where you two must have had a conversation about the partnership of bringing up both parties, and agreed that it was better for both of you, for whatever reason, that Lisa went back to work, as it was in my case. And I suppose, is that the angle you're saying, that actually in order to promote gender equality, it should be just as easy for men to stay at home? We should enable men to stay at home without stigma and also with more support. Is that kind of the angle you're coming from?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's very easy when you first become parents to slip into kind of gender stereotyping. There's a lot of expectation, certainly in heterosexual relationships, that there's a role. We still see sort of roles in this quite binary nature of, traditionally a woman had caring responsibilities, men had breadwinning responsibilities. I think it's much more complex than that on simply on a practical level, I think, because the majority of couples in some way are both working, and so working out what that looks like and what works for you as a couple and in a relationship is really, really important. And yeah, Lisa and I had conversations, and it ended up being quite a pragmatic decision, really. Also, I can't stand here, I can't sort of sit here and say 12 years ago, I knew I would be working as a coach with new dads, and it was all sort of mapped out for me. I was working away from home as a management consultant. Lisa works as a lawyer, long hours, and without sort of parental support around. Grandparents are in the Channel Islands and in Somerset, and we had to think quite carefully about how we would look after children, not just in the immediate kind of the first 6 months, but what it would look like longer term. So I think that's a conversation that sometimes men aren't necessarily driving or aren't thinking about it as much as their partners are, but it's really important to have that conversation. And actually for us as a couple, then it made more sense that I would take a step back, but largely on financial basis, I guess, first and foremost. And I think a lot of relationships, it is driven by finances. And ultimately I could work on a part-time basis as a consultant, and I could see how that could work, but we couldn't see how that would work in the law industry. And so that was kind of how we started and how we approached it. But ultimately, like you say, Lucinda, it's about having those conversations, having them early, and having everything on the table, I think.
So given that this is in the context of a work and HR listening to this, I suppose, did you have any repercussions in your employment or when you're working with dads and who are maybe not everyone can afford to drop one salary either initially? So maybe both are having to work, but the dad's doing more of the parenting than might traditionally be the case. What's your sort of recommendation for businesses as to how they can be more supportive of people? Because I think actually a lot of the time it is actually quite, it's very obvious if the woman is pregnant, they're pregnant and they go on maternity leave, she's visibly pregnant. It's very easy to forget completely that a man is about to have become a parent, and so it could be totally ignored, and your 2 weeks parental leave is neither here nor there, right, in terms of recognizing it. So what would you say businesses could do to be more alert to this?
I think there's a lot to be said, like you say, about that kind of visibility. The MAP B1 form, there's a lot of the conversations about maternity leave, and that just doesn't exist for men. So like you say, but men, I've been in a business where men were taking 2 weeks of fully paid leave, and the HR team were kind of like, and I posed the question, well, how many dads do you have and how would you know? And like, well, actually we might not, because there is no mechanism. Their manager might just be like, okay, take your 2 weeks, come back, and we may not be tracking it. We've got no way of knowing. So I think first and foremost, in terms of when we think about a broader equality piece, those businesses who are sort of stand out are ones where they've taken all of their parental leave policies, their adoption leave, their same-sex leave, same-sex policies, bereavement policies. They've often put it all together and said, actually, we need an overarching policy that covers all of these aspects, especially when we talk about adoption, especially when businesses sometimes get themselves in a tangle, as I just have as well with language, a tangle in terms of primary and secondary parent. And how can you have a birth parent and a non-birth parent? They get themselves tangled up. But actually, if you as a business can say, however you become a parent, then you are entitled to the same amount of leave, it does creates an enormous benefit for the business in terms of culturally how we see the role of men and women within that business. Because we can no longer say, maybe in the recruitment process, we can no longer say, actually, individuals, a man and a woman, both equally well qualified. If we can't tell which of these two high performers are likely to want to take extended leave when they become a parent, if they become a parent, and that big if is, we can't discriminate against women who are going to become parents, if we can't discriminate against anyone, because everyone's going to take leave, everyone maybe wants to work flexibly, and we change the culture. And so businesses that have embraced that have really, first and foremost, they've equalized how they see parents. And in many ways, what they've done is actually they've looked at their paternity leave policies, and they said, actually, because we're giving a lot less, we're basically signaling that men are not expected to take on childcaring responsibilities. And when we do that, we create this two-tier system, both in those individual businesses, but also at home, and for those within those relationships. We say that men aren't supposed to be caring. We don't offer that, and therefore these assumptions, the cultural assumptions, they exist already within society, and we maintain them within that workplace. So that's the really big thing that businesses can do.
Can I ask a really basic question here? Because there's been some changes legally, haven't there, that companies are able to allow people to share What is the current legal position? But does is that the case, that the government has said that you can share maternity or parental leave between two adults? I have to say, it confuses me how you actually administer or manage that as an employer and otherwise. I don't know if you can tell us anything on that, because I've never really understood how you do that. But you're saying really that then if you need to align your policies in an organisation to say that we support shared parental leave. Does every business have to do it at the moment?
Yeah, so shared parental leave is a policy that came in around about, I think it's 2015. It was a Lib Dem policy as part of the coalition government. And what it does is it allows a birth mother to transfer some of her leave to her partner. And how that works can be remarkably complicated, and it's one of the reasons why it's not the uptake is fairly low. The traditional model of shared parental leave is that a woman will transfer it to her male partner, and that's the model. And actually, the uptake around that is somewhere around between 2 and 6% of eligible men actually take that up. And some of the challenges are that because it's optional for a man working in a business who maybe don't see that as important, even though it's a legal right, him optionally taking leave that he doesn't have to take and taking it away from his partner. Not every mother was going to want to give her leave for a variety of reasons, and not every man's going to feel comfortable taking leave that he doesn't have to take. And so you have this and so that's a challenge. Also, because of the nature of when it's often taken, it's usually statutory, is how it's built within the legislation, I believe. A lot of business do enhance it, but it becomes quite complicated. And so, where the likes of Aviva, for instance, as kind of forerunners in a lot of this conversation, but there's a lot of other companies as well who do more. They enhance the pay for it. So you might have a situation where actually mother may only have statutory leave, and the dad can take the SPL, the shared parental leave, at full pay. And so it makes perfect sense financially for that couple to then transfer the period of leave from a financial point of view to the man. But a lot of this, it's remarkably complicated. It's not ring fenced, it's optional, and it's transferable. So it doesn't really drive the behaviours. The big behaviour that it has driven from a corporate perspective is that when that legislation came in, it opened the eyes to policymakers within businesses to say, actually, we can go, that's the minimum. If we want to stand out as a business, we're going to add on to that. And so initially they were adding on and enhancing shared parental leave. And then they're saying, actually, this is ridiculous. We've got maternity leave, paternity leave, we've got shared parental leave, we've got adoption leave, we've got all these elements of leave. Why don't we just put them all together and we'll just treat parents the same? So it is complicated. I've come across men who've done it, and just like, it can be really difficult. You've got to really want to do it.
But how do you do it though? Is it through HMRC or through does my company have to talk to my husband's company, or how do they do it?
So the man in the business would apply for shared parental leave from his own business, I believe, and then it gets allocated across. I think that's how it works. But you've asked me a question, Lucinda, that I don't know the answer to. What I see is I tend to work with the men who take that extended leave. So
and what they do with it,
yeah. And so businesses, I'll get a message saying we've got a coachee for you. He's taken 16 weeks of leave in two separate bundles, and he's entitled to this much coaching. Here are his details. So these are men who I often work with men who have already gone through that thought process and are thinking about, actually, this is a really good opportunity.
So that's where you're kind of going into this enhanced benefits. So if we're thinking really, we're talking about employer brand, we're talking about supporting women in the workplace as well. So actually, if you're a very high predomination of women, it makes sense to provide shared parental leave more easily, maybe, than another organisation might be more motivated. It's a really weird, I think it's a really weird one, because it is good about equality. So it makes a really great statement about you as a business. But I can imagine it almost takes people by surprise if suddenly someone they didn't even realise was about to be a father wants to take extended leave. So it's a bit of something to get their heads around, isn't it? So maybe being more upfront about it. So from a business point of view, can we be more upfront about it? Can we promote this and actually show it as a real step, a differentiator? Because many businesses are not good at this, but we're open to it. because we believe in gender equality. And this is a way in which we can do that by enabling men. So whether or not our business benefits, because the likelihood of, in my business, any man that takes shared parental leave is actually going to benefit a different business. So it's quite altruistic.
Yes, it is.
Overall, it's a message about gender equality. So I get that. And hopefully what goes around comes around if we do more of it. And then I think your point then going here, so the other ways in which altruistic businesses are maybe then supporting, not only have I allowed you to take shared parental leave, I'm prepared to invest in you as a coach, to give you a coach to support you in getting the best out of it. Well, I guess this is going in sort of corporate responsibility. It's about well-being, maybe loyalty and engagement, so people come back. Is it what's this about? What's in it for the business here before we go into how you help people?
Yeah, in terms of the end for coaching support, so it's about seeing it first and foremost. I think it starts off being about equality within the offer. So if we're supporting, the typical model for maternity return to work coaching, also any kind of long-term return to work coaching, is often about a session sort of before you return, sessions shortly after, or but possibly if it's planned leave before you go away on leave, and then afterwards, and maybe one just after just before you come back, and one afterwards, that kind of model. And so business is starting to recognize actually the pressures in terms of the transition and coming back into the workplace after a period of extended leave are very similar regardless of how you go on leave. And so as businesses offer more and more extended leave, there's more and more men from a paternity perspective who are taking that leave, and therefore it starts off from an equality point of view. There is a lot about men's mental health, which is, I think, supporting men in and of its own isn't as significant in many ways, but increasing awareness that the men's mental health piece is something that needs more care and attention, as we kind of see that men struggle to kind of process and struggle with mental health more generally. So there is that well-being angle, and it changes your perspective of roles and responsibilities within the business. And I was struck by a conversation I had a couple of years ago when I went into a business that my wife used to work at, Lisa, and to do a talk about why men's work-life balance mattered to everyone, which is quite a provocative topic, because it's not usually an angle. And this was pre-pandemic as well, so it was kind of like, this is a little bit left field. But the lady who got me involved in it used to work with Lisa very closely. She said, when I first met Lisa, I didn't think she had kids because I didn't think a mum could do this job. She said, I realized for me as a young woman how damaging that belief would be. If I held that belief, who else held that belief? Probably everyone. And therefore we start to see being a mum as some kind, or even not sure, someone who might become a mum or doesn't want to become a mum, we see that individual as in some way sort of less capable, less committed to the business. And if we can flip that round, we have men who are taking their leave, being loud, saying, actually, I've had this amazing time on my extended shared parental leave, or whatever mechanism it is, and now I'm going to change my work pattern so that I can be more involved, I can pick the kids up, and this is what I want to do. And actually we change it, and then other men are going, oh, actually, that would be really good for me to do as well. And suddenly it becomes this kind of groundswell of this movement,
culture change, and really, isn't it? But by people standing up and demanding it, which in turn will make it more. I can see how. I mean, it's interesting as a woman. You kind of go, why does it take the men to do it to make it happen? But I think that is then generating the equality, because actually, and I think to a certain extent the pandemic has done that as well, where suddenly we've not had to pretend that we don't have children and animals and commitments, and we've all been able to perform while having those things and juggling those things. So why not allow us to do that? I think people are not prepared to compromise that. But so then going back, here's one I'm wondering about, just going the other side though, I suppose. When you're coaching men, one of the things that I remember experiencing myself, and I think it's quite common in returning mothers, is that you get a little bit of a sense of confidence loss because you've been out of the work. I don't think it's to do with the fact, well, I don't know what the cause is actually. It could be to do with the fact you've had a bit of a role change and you've become this mother, and now you're not quite sure what you are when you come into the workplace. Or it could just be that it's an extended period of time away from the workplace. I mean, do you notice that in men?
Yeah, sort of is the answer. So it's not about confidence. So men don't present. I work with maternity coaches as well, and we talk about this side of things quite a lot in terms of how we support new parents. So I have a course called the New Dads Accelerator, and my course content is subtly different because we don't talk about confidence. We talk about quite practical things, but actually it's about the time out of the office. So for men who take some extended leave, it's about their credibility. So they're thinking about the credibility. Actually, they're doing a lot of the work I end up doing with men is the sort of thing I used to do with management consultancy, individuals, managers, where we'd plot out the stakeholders. We'd plot out, actually, if we've got a finite amount of time, and actually we don't want to be in the office all the time, which we used to be, the traditional way of doing it was I just work hard, I just redouble my efforts. But actually, and a lot of men will do that, when they become new dads, they'll be like, well, I've got to work harder, I need to provide. That kind of narrative is really, really strong. But also, actually, if I want to stick to my hours and I want to be more present at home, and I want to keep these sort of flexible working arrangements that I've got, what is it that's key to me being seen as success as work? So for men, it's about being practical, about getting really efficient with how to deliver without. And I guess that would be very similar that it would be for a female audience, because limited amount of time, I can't just add time on the end because I don't want to, and I can't really, that sort of something that's often associated with women returning to work. And more men are saying, actually, I don't want to be working all the hours just to make up for how I want to progress and all the rest of it. How do I get really efficient? How am I seen as really, really effective at work? So it's not a confidence thing, it's more about I would say personal effectiveness would be a way of.
I remember thinking, I remember I had quite a few when I was heading up training department. I had quite a few part-time females, they were at the time, because this is going back a bit, and I remember thinking that they were the most efficient or most effective people because there was no compromise. They needed to get to the nursery pickup, and so they had to be very, very efficient. They weren't chatting around the coffee machine, they were just cracking on with it. But I always thought that the imposter complex was probably a bit stronger as well in the initial stages of going back to work. And I don't know, I mean, I'm sure guys feel it, but maybe they just don't admit it to the same extent.
They don't, a little bit, but not occasionally. But it's not that, it's not about that, actually. No. I thought it would be a little bit more when I first started working with those guys. But I think going back to your earlier point, Lucinda, about it's a shame that we have to have men doing things differently in order to reap some of the benefits for women. And I think it's a shame that we're in that position. But the reality is that actually, we get gender equality at work when we have gender equality at home. Yeah. And I think that's another part of the conversation in many ways.
Yes, and I suppose just briefly on that one, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Because there were statistics going through the pandemic that women picked up when both parties were at home, that women picked up more of the workload in terms of the non-work workload, in terms of the family workload. Again, this is choice as much as anything else, I guess. Yeah. And the whole sort of mental load, the life admin stuff. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think the stats are pretty clear that women picked up more of the slack, but men did a lot more than they'd previously done. So there's a kind of positive story in there. But I guess the biggest positive story is for a lot of men who were previously office-based, who perhaps weren't involved in the domestic activity during the week. They were back late, or perhaps they were just at the weekend, they're weekend parenting. They've realized actually perhaps they were disconnected from their families, in particular their children. Men tend to report being much more interested in the connection with their children than with their partners, afraid to say. I think the stats suggest that men do a lot more. Yeah. Right, exactly. Happy medium somewhere.
Yeah.
They did a lot more childcare, but they weren't doing what we might call second shift domestic activity. So they were being connected with their kids. But actually, in many ways, that's a route into bigger and better things, because men report increased satisfaction, increased connection with their kids, and they want more of it. And that's what the data shows. And also, I think in many ways, actually, if you catch, and we know that if you catch men at the start of their parental journey and where they can have solo leave looking after their children. That's the thing that really drives equality at home, because men get to be on their own. They get to make their mistakes. They get to set some of those domestic agendas about how we do things, how we do the washing, how do we stack the dishwasher, things like this, that men actually, who don't get the opportunity to be domestic goddesses, for want of a better word, they feel like they're being told off. And and actually, if you can get it right at the start, and you get some equality, and you get you share that domestic activity and childcare as well, then that's really positive. And I think the COVID points to a desire for men who traditionally have thought, actually, working from home, that's what slackers do, that's what women do. It's a really bad narrative for my business if I want to work from home. Now, much more likely, much more connected, the opportunities are there for better domestic harmony, I think.
Yeah, it gives you much more chance to be flexible and fit other things around things, which I suppose arguably being stereotypical, although there's some evidence that brains work differently, maybe that is something that lends itself more to women in terms of they will do multiple things at once. But I do see that women are also culpable for taking over in the workplace, not letting the men choose the I think myself being a bit of a control freak in certain areas about making sure we've got the food in, or what we're going to have for dinner, or things like that. However, so it's like any good team or partnership, thinking of that home life and going, but who's better at folding and doing the washing? My husband is much better. He complains about mine, although he does occasionally doesn't differentiate the whites, of course. And I'm sure that most blokes would say they're better at loading the dishwasher because that's a spatial thing. But I'll probably have loads of complaints about this episode being very stereotypically.
There's a reason why. There's a reason why they're stereotypes, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they build on top of each other. We often follow the narrative that we saw our own parents creating for us.
Absolutely. Or some things we enjoy more and less, and actually if you can play to your own strengths and that works out, right, that's great. But the key is making sure that there's a balance in terms of the work and it's shared out, and not being, and I suppose not restricting things. Your point about allowing men to have that time on their own with babies at the start, I think is really important, because I can think of friends of mine where the mother-in-law's come down and taken over, and the blokes just had nothing to do with the newborn baby, for example, and they're scared of it and they don't know how to change nappy or whatever, so you really have got to get in and get on with it to build that confidence in the first place. Otherwise you can't then turn around and say, oh well, he doesn't ever do anything with them, when you never let them in the first place. So
and there's some psychological background behind that, Lucinda. There's something called the I've completely forgotten what it is now.
We'll come back to it, I'm sure, don't worry.
It'll come back to me.
It'll come back. If not, we'll put it on the show notes. But so you're talking about the different balance between partnerships. Is that what you're saying? There's difference.
Yeah, it's a protective, it's a nurturing aspect, and actually it's hormonal as much as anything. Is that the mother wants to protect their baby, and that can feel like the man doesn't have a role to play, or is excluded from that process. It's called maternal gatekeeping.
Well done.
And it has popped into my head.
Well done.
So maternal gatekeeping.
Yeah,
maternal gatekeeping. Yeah. And it's one of the things I discussed within the New Dads Accelerator. I said, guys, you need to understand that this is the thing, and this is why if you leave it, you're going to get this division of labour between what you're allowed to do and how you're allowed to do it. But actually, you need to kind of keep plugging away at this, because actually it's not helpful. It's helpful and from a protective point of view, and it's quite sort of primitive in many ways, sort of primitive human evolutionary aspect of it. But actually, from a sort of a modern society, then the more you can be seen as a safe pair of hands and ultimately make mistakes. You've got to make your own mistakes and learn from them, and that's how we improve things, I think.
Metaphor for life and work as well. So I suppose just wrapping up here, we've covered quite a lot actually in a brief amount of time here. So the real key of this is your premise is that the real route to gender equality is actually enabling men to take their share of parental leave. That would be a quite a forward thinking, maybe try and get more than 2 to 6% you said actually take up on it. So from a business point of view, from an HR point of view, maybe that's a policy worth revisiting. How could we do more of it? It feels altruistic, but basically in terms of paying it forward, it could be incredibly constructive. And it's a very strong message as well to other people in the business if men are able to take it. you've also talked a bit, perhaps just to close on, do you want to talk a little bit about the course you do? So the sort of support that you're offering, and you mentioned a course and also a webinar you've got, haven't you?
Yeah, so there's a few different angles. So in terms of the webinar, it's 30 minutes. We talk about why supporting new dads at work is the route to gender equality. I put the just to get people's attention, and it's about explaining why supporting dads, what the pressures men face, and therefore by supporting them, how do we actually improve gender equality within the workplace and at home as well, and how do those interact? There's lots of data within that, and that's if you go to my website inspiringdads.co.uk, it's /webinar. So there's a big red button in the top corner. I'm doing those. Running a second one in a couple of days' time, but there'll be regular ones.
So is that just something you'll run as an open webinar that companies can sign up to, or individuals can sign up to? So they can
individuals can sign up to that one. It's a sample of the sort of things that I think are important to bear in mind. And then in terms of, I do one-to-one coaching with new dads, in particular around extended parental leave, but it can be with anyone. I mean, dads struggle whether they're taking 16 weeks of leave or whether they're taking 2 weeks. It's a particularly challenging time, and in fact almost more challenging if you've only got a couple of weeks and you haven't really processed those early challenges. And then the New Dads Accelerator, we look to get between 6 and 12 men together. I call them first-year fathers. So we've had men who who are on their third child, revisiting some of those aspects that are important around identity and purpose. And we get men together virtually. We get prospective dads, ones who are expecting, and we get them together to talk about sort of key aspects over a 5-week course. It's really powerful when you get men together and actually talk.
Because women tend to do that more naturally, don't they? Anyway, so actually facilitating that's quite key, and that I suppose men could sign up to anyway. They don't have to get that through work, do they? That's something you could choose to.
It's something that will be going live in terms of need to have enough people in the pipeline to make it worthwhile. Because one-to-one coaching obviously is easy just to do on a one-to-one basis, but something like a group coaching, you need to have between 6 and 12 men ready to go. Because not everyone attends all the sessions. Sign up. Maybe there's people in our position here who might nominate their other halves. Okay, exactly. Fantastic. So we've got, it's inspiringdads.co.uk. Yeah. And everything I presume we can get the webinar, you say you can sign up to that on there, but details, if you want to register interest in your accelerator or any of the other programs, they can get details there. Fantastic. Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. Ian, lovely to speak to you. Thank you so much for joining us on the HR Uprising podcast.
Thank you for having me, Lucinda.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.